In this video, I am going to be comparing and showing you all the specs between this year's S23 Ultra and last year's S22 Ultra. So without wasting any more time, let's get right into it. So starting off with the actual dimensions of the phone, the dimensions for the S22 Ultra and the S23 Ultra are basically identical. As you can see right here, the S23 Ultra is just ever so slightly bigger, but you would never be able to tell this small of a difference even if you had both of them in your hand. As far as weight goes, on the S22 Ultra, you've got 8.08 ounces, and on the S23 Ultra, you're gonna have 8.25 ounces, which is 229 grams and 234 grams respectively. Both are water and dust IPX68 water resistant. Both have the power button and the volume control on the right side of the phone. Last but not least, when it comes to design, is the glass that is used on the front part of the screen. The S22 Ultra used Gorilla Glass Victus, and the S23 Ultra is going to be using Gorilla Glass Victus 2, which is going to offer the same scratch resistance, but it offers better drop resistance. And I forgot to mention, both phones have an aluminum frame too. Moving on to display, both phones have a 3088 by 1440 pixel resolution with a 19 by 3 by 9 ratio, and both phones have 501 pixels per inch. Both phones feature the same dynamic AMOLED display featuring LTPO technology, which allows the phone to go from 1 Hz all the way up to 120 Hz whenever needed to save battery life. Oh, and did I mention both phones have really bright screens up to 1750 nits peak brightness. Let's check out the actual hardware in this phone. So the S22 Ultra is using the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, which is a 4nm chip, and the S23 Ultra is using the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy, which is also a 4nm chip, but this one, since it is optimized for Galaxy, it is going to be able to clock a little bit higher clock speeds than all of the other phones that are using this same exact chip. If you were looking at base storage, both phones on the base storage option is only going to have 8GB of RAM, and if you step up on either phones, you're gonna get 12GB of RAM. We'll go over storage options later on in the video. Next up is battery, which is something a lot of people care a lot about, including me. So both phones are going to have the same 5000 mAh battery, but do not let that fool you. The S23 Ultra has way better battery life. Due to that chip being way more efficient, it's able to stretch out that battery life way longer than the S22 Ultra. Both phones have 45 watt wired USB-C fast charging and 15 watts wireless charging. Also, both phones have wireless power share, which is going to be able to give up to 4.5 watts to whatever you are power sharing to. Now on to the fun part, the cameras. So both phones feature a quad camera setup on the back, but the S22 Ultra is going to have a 108 megapixel main sensor, while the S23 Ultra is going to have a whopping 200 megapixel main sensor. While on the topic of that main sensor, the S22 Ultra is going to have an aperture of 1.8, and the S23 Ultra has a faster aperture of 1.7, which means it will perform better in low light performance. The second camera, which is the telephoto lens, both phones have 10 megapixels on this sensor. And as far as the telephoto lens, not the best lens for low light. Anytime you're in low light performance, you really want to be using something like the main camera that will perform good in that dark scenario. Moving on to the ultra wide, so both phones are going to have a 12 megapixel camera on this sensor with f2.2 apertures on both phones. Both phones can record 8K. The S22 Ultra could go up to 24 frames and the S23 Ultra can go up to 30 frames. Both phones can record 4K 60 frames per second. And last but not least, that front camera that got that much needed downgrade. That's right, the front camera went from 40 megapixels on the S22 Ultra down to 12 megapixels on the S23 Ultra. I don't know. We'll have to wait for some camera tests to see how big of a difference this actually makes. These days, a lot of the times, megapixels are starting to matter less and less due to the computing and the post-production that the phone does to the photos that we take. So even though we went down to 12 megapixels, the photos might still come out better. Who knows? Subscribe to see the camera test. Both of the main camera sensors have amazing optical image stabilization, but that OIS got way better in the s23 Ultra. You can notice a pretty big difference if you're shaking the s22 Ultra and you're also shaking the s23 Ultra right beside each other. It's a pretty big difference in the optical image stabilization. So the s22 Ultra came in 4 storage configurations: 128, 256, 512, and 1 terabyte. The s23 Ultra just comes in 3 storage configurations, which is 256 as the base, 512, and 1 terabyte. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and a subscribe. It would really help me out, and I will see you in the next one.